The Ministry of Social Development has been ordered to wipe the debt of a seriously ill, often wheelchair-bound beneficiary who was forced to live in his car on and off because MSD didn't think his situation was an emergency. Then when it did help him into motel accommodation, MSD insisted he pay back the $10,000 it cost, even though he had no way of ever doing so. The Social Security Appeal Authority reviewed the man's case in September 2017, but only delivered its decision last month. It concluded that leaving a man with a potentially fatal condition to live in a car was incompatible with his human dignity and the values of New Zealand society. It said the man regularly pleaded for MSD's help and that he was homeless through no fault of his own. It was due to a lack of affordable housing. The authority also said any suggestion the man could afford to pay back the special needs accommodation grant had no connection with reality. Auckland Action Against Poverty helped the man get his case reviewed. Its spokesperson, Ricardo Menendez-March, said instead of help, MSD burdened the man with debt.
We've got a man that was ill, that was facing hardship and went to work an income requiring assistance. This is somebody who was failed by the social agencies and who was desperately seeking somewhere to stay because he needed to take medication, and his medical conditions meant that his life would be at risk if he was to sleep in his car or in the streets.
And that's where he was sleeping, in his car?
Yes. So this is somebody who was sleeping in the car, and work and income, instead of providing assistance, gave him a $10,000 debt, and the assistance that they provided was intermittent. So it meant that at times he was still not able to access emergency accommodation, despite it amounting thousands of dollars worth of debt with the ministry.
So he had a medical condition, potentially life-threatening, and I understand he was sometimes using a wheelchair, is that right?
Absolutely. So this is somebody who not only had, this is somebody who had a very visible disability, a visible health condition. There was no excuse for the case managers to not have picked up that this is a man who clearly had specific needs, somebody who was not, nobody should be sleeping in their cars or in the street, but this is somebody who particularly needed somewhere warm and dry to spend his nights.
Did you consider him to be in an emergency situation?
Absolutely.
Because MSD says he wasn't. Well, initially said he wasn't.
Exactly. And this is a fight that advocates have to take up day and day again, where MSD and Work and Income will not treat clearly emergency situations as such, and people will have to beg for assistance just to be turned down, or if the assistance is provided, like in this case, it'll be slapped with a debt.
So, in brief, how would you describe the way he was treated?
Completely unacceptable, callous and cruel. This is a complete failure by MSD to provide the assistance they're supposed to provide. And this is not historic, this is ongoing. This is something that is still happening despite a change of government. We've still got people that are faced with recoverable advances instead of just straight up assistance because they're homeless.
Well, here's the thing. The Ministry of Social Development says the rules have changed. They're applied differently now. This is something, in essence, that is in the past. They say these days most grants for emergency accommodation don't have to be paid back.
It is true that there's been a reduction in the recoverable grants, but it still amounts to about 10% of them. We're talking about 3,000 people in a period of 3 months that required emergency housing this year. So what this is we've got hundreds of people who would have been slapped with a debt still, and some of the reasons are really arbitrary, such as failing to look for alternative private accommodation, people who can never afford a private rental.
Yeah,
and
but
despite
the military, sorry to interrupt, but the ministry also says it's because some of them have clearly been bad tenants. They may have wrecked properties, they may have been kicked out through their own fault and misbehaviour. So should they have their debts cleared?
Absolutely. Well, the problem with emergency housing is that people living there have no rights as tenants. A motel could arbitrarily kick them out without a person having a right of reply, as you would if you were living in a private rental. The problem is that if you're facing discrimination from a motelier, they could kick you out just because they don't like you. They could blame you for bad behavior, and there is no process where you could defend yourself against the motelier who simply wants to make a profit and wants to have, tenants or people staying there who have more money.
Do you think there are wider implications from this decision?
This decision has political implications. What this tells me is that the way that the Ministry of Social Development has been handling emergency accommodation is wrong, and they should be going back, looking at each individual case where the emergency accommodation grant was made recoverable, and it should be investigated. At the very least, I would expect the ministry to wipe the debt of all the people who had been in an emergency situation and were given a recoverable advance.
So, a loan, in essence, they were given. You think it's the ministry's responsibility to proactively review all of these cases?
Absolutely, or at least do a blanket, wiping off the debt. I think it will take a lot of resources to wipe the debt altogether, but I think this is something that has deep and long-term impacts on beneficiaries. These people are carrying a debt, some of them for the rest of their life, and it affects their finances. They're having to pay $20 each week at a time where they already are struggling to pay for food. We just saw a report about how many families are struggling to even cover the basic costs, and the debt that they're carrying is going to make them struggle even more to afford basic goods.
Is this man owed an apology?
This man is owed an apology, but it's not just him. It's actually the hundreds or thousands of people that continue to be put in this situation. So the ministry cannot simply apologise to one man and continue doing the same things to many other people in the future.
That is Ricardo Menendez-March from Auckland Action Against Poverty. Now, the Minister for Social Development, Carmel Sepuloni, also agrees that the ministry should apologise to the man. She told me that under her watch, MSD has more empathy, but the onus is still on beneficiaries to appeal what could be unfair decisions that burden them with debt.
I think that it was unacceptable.
Why?
It's unacceptable because to state that his situation was not an emergency situation is, in my mind, from what I've seen, incorrect. And the emergency housing assistance, in my mind, that he received shouldn't have been made recoverable. It should have been non-recoverable. And I think, where people think that they have a case like that where a determination by MSD they think was wrong, then they need to be going through the review process to check whether or not that is the case.
Should they have to battle like that, though, to get what they're entitled to?
No, they shouldn't. And that's why a big part of this year, for me as well, has been concentrated on changing the service culture and delivery at MSD. And I think we've seen some of those changes come about with things like, more people getting access to the supports they need. There have been decreases in the number of people that have been suspended, had their benefits suspended or cancelled, increases in the numbers of hardship grants that have been given out or approved or accepted. And so I would hope, too, that with cases like this, where someone presents with serious need, that the treatment that they're receiving from MSD now is much more empathetic and compassionate compared to what they would have received under the previous government.
Do you think that this client is owed an apology from MSD?
I think so.
Are you going to tell them that?
Well, look, I've only been presented with this case this afternoon, but it will be definitely something that I talk with my officials about.
What do you think the wider implications of this case are? Because the decision made it very clear that this man did not contribute in any way to his homelessness. In fact, they say that it was because there was a lack of available housing at an affordable price. Could it be that there are other cases where people should have their debt waived because they have similar circumstances?
Look, if people think that they have a case in terms of whatever ruling was made to them and they feel like it was not befitting with the policy of the time, then they should definitely take up a case. I would encourage people to do that if they think that the ruling that was made against them was incorrect. And, with regards to this case, I think I've only just been informed of this particular one, but I'll be speaking about this with officials. And, this does, in my mindset, put out their questions, and I think our officials need to be taking that into consideration with regards to if there are other cases that come up along these lines where a person has been made to pay back a debt despite the fact that it was not their fault and there was an incorrect ruling or judgment made at the time, then NSD needs to be open to responding to that.
And that's the Social Development Minister, Carmel Sepuloni. As she mentioned there, this case was heard under the previous government in 2017, but the decision was only delivered in the last couple of weeks.